The moment Jake opened his eyes, he knew he was going to die on this planet. Sand filled his mouth, and the twin suns above burned like angry eyes in the orange sky. His exploration ship lay twisted around him, metal still hot from the crash. The emergency beacon blinked weakly, but Jake knew help wouldn't come for days, maybe weeks. He pulled himself from the wreckage, his survival suit torn and his water supply down to less than a day's worth. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, nothing but rocks and dunes under the crushing heat. That's when he saw her. At first, Jake thought the crash had damaged his eyes. A figure moved between the rocks about 50 yards away, stumbling like she was drunk or hurt. As she came closer, his breath caught in his throat. She wasn't human. Her skin was a soft green color like new leaves in spring. Long purple hair hung past her shoulders, dirty and tangled from wandering in the desert. She had 2 arms, 2 legs, normal hands with 5 fingers each, but her eyes glowed with a faint golden light that no human eyes ever had. She stopped when she saw him, her body swaying slightly. Even from a distance, Jake could see she was in bad shape. Her simple clothes were torn and she looked thin, like she hadn't eaten in days. "Please," she called out in perfect English, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Do you have water?" Jake's hand went to his water container. Half of him said to keep it for himself. The other half looked at this strange, beautiful girl and couldn't say no. "A little," he replied, walking slowly toward her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but Jake could see she was lying. She moved like every step hurt, and there was something wrong with the way she kept touching her forehead like she had a fever. "My name is Vera," she said when he got close enough to see the golden flecks in her glowing eyes. "My ship crashed 3 days ago. I've been looking for water ever since." "Jake," he said, offering his water container. "Human explorer. Just crashed about 10 minutes ago." Vera took the water with shaking hands and drank carefully, not taking too much. The simple act of kindness surprised Jake. Most beings he'd met in his travels would have grabbed it all. "Thank you," she whispered, handing it back. "I thought I was going to die alone out here." "We both might still," Jake said honestly, looking at the endless desert around them. "But at least we won't be alone." Vera smiled, and for a moment her golden eyes seemed to burn brighter. Then she swayed on her feet and Jake had to catch her before she fell. Her skin was burning hot, much hotter than the desert air. Through her torn shirt he could feel her heart beating too fast like a trapped bird. "I'm sick," she admitted, leaning against him. "It's not what you think, though. It's complicated." Jake helped her sit in the shade of his wrecked ship. Whatever was wrong with her, it was getting worse. Her breathing was quick and shallow, and she kept looking at him with an expression he couldn't understand. Part fear, part something else. "We need to find shelter," Jake said, checking his supplies. "And more water." "Can you walk?" Vera nodded, but Jake could see the effort it took for her to stand. As they began walking toward a line of rocks in the distance, she stayed close to him, close enough that he could smell her hair, like flowers and rain, impossible in this desert wasteland. "Jake," she said softly as they walked. "Yeah? There are things about my species you don't understand, things that might make you want to leave me behind." Jake looked at her glowing eyes and green skin, at the way she moved like every step was a battle. "Try me," he said. But Vera just shook her head and kept walking, leaving Jake to wonder what secrets she was hiding and why the thought of leaving her behind felt impossible. Even though he'd known her for less than an hour, the twin suns burned overhead, and somewhere in the distance, Jake thought he heard the sound of wind through caves. Maybe they would find shelter after all, if they could survive whatever was happening to Vera first. The caves Jake had heard were real, carved into red stone cliffs about 2 miles from the crash site. By the time they reached them, Vera was barely walking. She leaned heavily on Jake's arm, her green skin now pale and covered in sweat. "Just a little further," Jake encouraged, though he wasn't sure she could make it. Her fever had gotten worse during their walk, and she kept making small sounds of pain. The cave entrance was narrow but opened into a larger chamber inside. It was cooler here, away from the twin suns, and Jake could hear the sound of dripping water somewhere deeper in the tunnels. "Water," Vera whispered, her eyes lighting up with hope. Jake helped her sit against the cave wall and went to explore. 20 feet back, he found a small pool fed by water seeping through the rock. It wasn't much, but it was clean and cool. He filled his container and brought it back to Vera. She drank deeply this time, not holding back. The water seemed to help a little. Her breathing slowed and some color returned to her cheeks. "Better?" Jake asked, sitting beside her. Vera nodded, but then her whole body shuddered. She wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold, even though Jake could feel heat radiating from her skin. "Jake," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes, "I need to tell you something about my species, about what's happening to me." "I'm listening." Vera was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My people, we have seasons like animals on your world. Times when our bodies change when we need—" She stopped, her cheeks turning a darker shade of green. "When we need to mate." Jake felt his stomach drop. "And that's what's happening to you now?" "Yes." The word came out like a confession. "It started 2 days ago. That's why I was banished from my ship. My crew couldn't risk having me around other males during this time. They were taking me to a colony world where I could find a mate of my own species." "But you crashed." "But I crashed." Vera looked up at him then, her golden eyes bright with unshed tears. "And now I'm stuck here with you, and every hour it gets worse. My body temperature rises, my instincts become stronger, and She stopped again, biting her lip. "And what?" "And I start to lose control of myself. I start to want things that I shouldn't want. Especially around males." She looked away from him again. "You should leave me here, Jake. Find your own shelter. When rescue comes, tell them where I am, but don't stay with me." Jake stared at her. The smart thing would be to do exactly what she said. He barely knew this girl, and she was telling him she might become dangerous. But as he looked at her sitting there, scared and sick and trying to protect him even when she needed help herself, Jake knew he couldn't walk away. "No," he said firmly. Vera's head snapped up. "What?" "I said no. I'm not leaving you." Jake moved closer to her, ignoring the way her breath caught when he did. "We're both stranded here. We have a better chance of surviving together than apart." "You don't understand," Vera said, her voice rising with panic. "When the fever gets worse, I might hurt you. I might do things you don't want. Then we'll deal with that when it happens." Jake reached out and took her hand. Her skin was burning hot, but she didn't pull away. "Right now you're sick and scared, and I'm not abandoning someone who needs help." Tears finally spilled from Vera's glowing eyes. "Why would you risk that for me? You don't even know me." Jake squeezed her hand gently. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because—" He paused, surprised by his own words. "Because I don't want to be alone either." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the drip of water and the distant howl of wind outside the cave. Vera's fever seemed to ease slightly, and she stopped shaking. "Thank you," she said finally. "Don't thank me yet," Jake replied with a small smile. "We still have to figure out how to survive until rescue comes." As if on cue, Vera's body tensed again, and she made a small sound of distress. The fever was coming back stronger than before. Her eyes began to glow brighter, and Jake could see her fighting some internal battle. "Jake," she whispered, her voice strained. "It's starting again. You should move to the other side of the cave." Instead, Jake moved closer. "What can I do to help?" "Nothing," Vera said. But even as she spoke, she was leaning toward him like a plant seeking sunlight. "Everything. I don't know." Jake carefully put his arm around her shoulders, and Vera melted against him with a sigh of relief. Her fever was burning through both their clothes, but she seemed calmer when he held her. "Is this okay?" he asked. "It helps," she admitted. "But Jake, it's going to get much worse before it gets better." As if to prove her point, Vera's whole body shuddered again, and this time Jake felt something change in the air between them, something electric and dangerous. But he didn't let go. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. Jake woke to the sound of Vera crying. It was their second day in the caves, and her condition had gotten much worse overnight. She lay curled in a ball against the cave wall, her whole body shaking with fever. Her purple hair was soaked with sweat, and her golden eyes glowed so bright they lit up the dark corners of their shelter. "Vera?" Jake crawled over to her, concern filling his chest. "What's wrong?" "Everything hurts," she whispered, her voice broken. "My whole body feels like it's on fire. And the urges are getting stronger." Jake had spent yesterday learning how to take care of her. He'd found more water deeper in the caves, along with some edible plants growing near underground streams. He'd even managed to catch a few small cave fish with his bare hands. But nothing seemed to help with Vera's fever. "Here," he said gently, helping her sit up. "Drink some water." Vera's hands were shaking too much to hold the container, so Jake held it for her. As she drank, some water spilled down her chin, and without thinking, Jake reached out to wipe it away. The moment his fingers touched her skin, Vera gasped and grabbed his wrist. Her eyes met his, blazing with golden fire. "Don't," she whispered, but she didn't let go of his hand. "Please don't touch me like that." "Why?" Jake asked, though he thought he already knew. "Because it makes it worse. It makes me want—" She closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. "It makes me want you." The words hung between them in the dim cave light. Jake felt his heart start to beat faster, but he tried to stay calm. "Is that such a bad thing?" he asked quietly. Vera's eyes snapped open. "Yes, you're human, I'm not. This is just biology. Just my body reacting to being near a male during my season. It doesn't mean anything real." But even as she said it, Jake could see the doubt in her glowing eyes. Over the past 2 days, they had talked for hours. He'd learned about her home world, about her job as a researcher, about her love of human poetry. She'd learned about his travels, his family back on Earth, his dreams of exploring the galaxy. They had connected in ways that had nothing to do with biology. "Maybe," Jake said carefully. "It started as just biology, but that doesn't mean it has to stay that way." Vera stared at him, her grip on his wrist tightening. "You don't understand what you're saying." "Then help me understand." For a moment, Jake thought she might explain, but then another wave of fever hit her and she doubled over with a cry of pain. Jake immediately moved to support her, pulling her against his chest. "I'm sorry," she gasped, clinging to his shirt. "I can't help it. When you're close, it's the only time the pain stops." Jake held her tighter, feeling her heart racing against his ribs. Her skin was so hot it was almost burning him, but he didn't care. "Then I'll stay close," he said simply. They spent the day like that, with Vera curled against Jake's chest while he told her stories to distract her from the pain. He talked about Earth's oceans, about cities that touch the clouds, about music and art and all the beautiful things humans had created. Vera listened with her eyes closed, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just humming softly when a story made her happy. When her fever spiked, Jake would get cold water and press wet cloth to her forehead until she calmed down. As the second sun began to set outside their cave, Vera's fever broke briefly and she seemed more like herself. "You should eat something," she told Jake, noticing he'd been giving her most of their food. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Vera sat up straighter, studying his face in the golden glow of her eyes. "You're getting thin, and there are dark circles under your eyes. You haven't been sleeping." Jake shrugged. "Someone needs to watch over you." "Why?" The question was soft but serious. "Really, Jake, why are you doing this? Any other person would have left by now." Jake looked at her, this beautiful, brave girl who was fighting a battle with her own body and still worried about his health. Her green skin seemed to shimmer in the cave light, and her purple hair fell around her face like silk. "Because," he said slowly, "somewhere between day 1 and now I stopped seeing you as just someone I was helping, and started seeing you as someone I—" He paused, surprised by his own honesty. "Someone I care about." Vera's breath caught. "Jake, I know it's crazy," he continued. "I know we barely know each other, but when I look at you, when I talk to you, it feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Before Vera could respond, her body tensed again. This time, though, she didn't pull away from him. Instead, she moved closer, her hand sliding up his chest. "The fever's coming back," she whispered, but there was something different in her voice now. Something that sounded less like fear and more like want. "What do you need?" Jake asked, his own voice rough. Vera looked up at him, her golden eyes full of longing and fear and something else Jake was afraid to name. "You," she whispered. "I need you." This time, when Jake reached out to touch her face, she didn't tell him to stop. Jake's hand trembled as he cupped Vera's face, his thumb tracing along her green cheek. Her skin was still burning with fever, but now her golden eyes held something deeper than pain. They held desire. "Are you sure?" he whispered, even as every part of him wanted to say yes to what she was offering. "No," Vera admitted, her voice shaky. "But I can't fight it anymore, Jake. The fever, the wanting, it's too strong." She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. When she opened them again, they were blazing like twin suns. "I've been trying so hard to stay in control," she continued, her hand still pressed against his chest. "But around you, I don't want to be in control anymore." Jake felt his resolve weakening. 3 days of taking care of her, of holding her through her fever, of getting to know the brilliant, kind person underneath her alien exterior. It had changed something in him, too. "Vera," he said softly, "I don't want you to do something you'll regret when this is over." She looked up at him with such tenderness that it took his breath away. "You think I'll regret you? Won't you?" Instead of answering with words, Vera rose up on her knees and kissed him. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting like the sweet cave water they'd been sharing. Jake felt his world tilt as she pressed closer to him, her hands tangling in his hair. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Does that feel like regret to you?" she whispered against his lips. Jake's answer was to kiss her back, deeper this time, his arms wrapping around her waist. Vera made a soft sound of pleasure that sent heat shooting through his body. "Your fever," he murmured when they came up for air again. "Is better when you touch me," Vera finished, her hands working at the fastenings of his torn exploration suit. "Jake, please, I need you to make it stop burning." There was no pretending anymore that this was just about her alien biology. The way she looked at him, the way she spoke his name, this was about them, about what had grown between them in their 3 days together. Jake helped her remove his jacket, then gently worked at the simple ties of her torn shirt. Vera's green skin seemed to glow in the cave light, beautiful and otherworldly. When his hands touched her bare shoulders, she arched into him with a gasp. "You're so beautiful," Jake whispered, meaning it completely. Vera's eyes filled with tears. "Even like this? Even when I'm not myself? Especially like this," Jake said, pressing soft kisses along her neck. "When you're being honest about what you want." They moved together slowly, carefully, Jake always checking to make sure Vera was okay, that this was what she truly wanted. Her fever seemed to ease as they touched, as if his presence was the medicine she'd been needing all along. When they finally came together completely, Vera cried out his name like a prayer. Jake held her close, feeling her heart beating against his, her purple hair spilling across his shoulders like silk. Afterward, they lay entwined on Jake's makeshift bed of salvaged fabric from his ship. Vera's fever had broken completely, and for the first time in days she seemed peaceful. "How do you feel?" Jake asked, running his fingers through her hair. "Like myself again," Vera said, lifting her head to look at him. "But also different." "Different how?" Vera was quiet for a moment, tracing patterns on Jake's chest with her finger. "On my world, the mating season is just about biology. Finding a suitable partner, producing offspring, continuing the species. It's not supposed to be about—" She paused, looking shy. "About what?" "About love." The word hung between them in the quiet cave. Jake felt his heart skip a beat. "Is that what this is?" he asked gently. "Love?" Vera met his eyes, her own glowing softly in the dim light. "I don't know what else to call it. This feeling that you matter more to me than my own survival. That I would rather face my worst fears with you than my greatest joys without you." Jake pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "On Earth we call that love too. Even between different species. Love is love," Jake said simply. "It doesn't care about green skin or golden eyes or where you were born." Vera smiled, the first truly happy expression Jake had seen on her face since they met. "My people wouldn't understand. Do you care?" "No," Vera said, surprising herself. "I don't think I do." They talked quietly as the cave grew darker around them, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Jake learned that Vera had always felt different from others of her species, more interested in exploring the galaxy than settling down. Vera learned that Jake had been searching for something his whole life without knowing what it was. "Maybe it was you," he said when she asked him about it. "Maybe it was us," Vera corrected, snuggling closer to his warmth. As they fell asleep together, neither of them heard the faint sound of engines in the distant sky. Help was coming, but for now they had found something more valuable than rescue. They had found each other. Jake woke to the sound of engines. For a moment he thought he was dreaming, but then Vera stirred in his arms, her golden eyes opening wide as she heard it too. "Rescue ships," she whispered, sitting up quickly. Through the cave entrance they could see lights moving across the dawn sky, 3 vessels with the markings of both human and alien rescue services. Jake felt a rush of relief, followed immediately by something that felt strangely like sadness. "We're saved," he said, but his voice lacked the joy it should have carried. Vera looked down at him, her purple hair falling around her face. Her mating season had ended during the night, and she seemed completely herself again, calm, rational, in control. But the way she looked at Jake hadn't changed. "Are we?" she asked softly. They both knew what she meant. Rescue would mean returning to their separate worlds, their separate lives. Jake would go back to exploring for the Human Space Service. Vera would return to her research position with the Galactic Science Coalition. The chances of them seeing each other again were almost zero. "We should signal them," Jake said, though he made no move to get up. "Yes," Vera agreed, but she didn't move either. Outside, the rescue ships were landing, their engines kicking up clouds of desert sand. Soon there would be medical teams, debriefing officers, reports to file. Their private world in the cave was about to be invaded by reality. "Jake," Vera said, her hand finding his. "What happens now?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "What do you want to happen?" Before Vera could answer, voices echoed from outside the cave. The rescue teams had found them. "In here," Jake called out, his voice carrying across the desert. Within minutes, the cave was filled with people. Human medics checking Jake for injuries. Alien healers scanning Vera with their bioreaders. Officers from both species asking questions about the crashes and their survival. "Remarkable," one of the alien healers said to her colleague as they examined Vera. "Her mating cycle completed successfully. But there's no genetic pairing recorded in our systems." Jake and Vera exchanged glances across the crowded cave. But before either could speak, a human officer approached Jake. "You did well, Explorer," the officer said. "Keeping you both alive in these conditions couldn't have been easy. We'll have you back to the nearest human station within the day." "What about Vera?" Jake asked. "The alien female will be returned to her own people, of course. They're already preparing a ship for her transport." Jake felt his stomach drop. Separate ships. Separate destinations. This was it then, the end of their story. As the rescue teams prepared to move them out of the cave, Jake found himself walking beside Vera toward the waiting ships. She looked smaller somehow among all the uniformed officers, more fragile. "Vera," he started to say, but she shook her head. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't make this harder than it already is." But as they reached the landing area, Jake saw something that made him stop walking. There were two ships waiting, one human, one alien, but there was also a third vessel he hadn't noticed before. It was smaller, sleeker, with markings that indicated private ownership rather than military service. "Whose ship is that?" he asked one of the rescue officers. "Ah," the officer smiled. "That belongs to Dr. Vera. We received her emergency beacon and came as soon as we could. She's quite famous in research circles, you know, brilliant xenobiologist." Jake stared at Vera, who had gone very still beside him. "Your ship?" Yes," Vera said quietly. "I have my own research vessel. I was between assignments when my original transport crashed." "Which means," Jake said slowly, understanding dawning on him, "you can go wherever you want. You're not bound to any specific assignment." Vera looked up at him, hope beginning to shine in her golden eyes. "What are you saying?" Jake turned to the human officer who had been preparing to escort him to the human ship. "What if I wanted to request a transfer? To the Xenobiology Research Division?" The officer raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual, but possible, I suppose." "Why?" Jake looked at Vera, his heart pounding. "Because I think I've found what I was searching for." Understanding passed between them like electricity. Vera stepped closer to Jake, close enough that he could see the golden flecks in her eyes, close enough to remember how she felt in his arms. "The research division always needs explorers," she said carefully. "People who can help with field work on unknown worlds." "And I've proven I'm good at survival situations," Jake added, not caring that everyone was staring at them now. "This is highly irregular," the alien rescue commander said, but there was amusement in his voice. "A human requesting assignment to an alien research vessel? Love usually is irregular," Vera said boldly, reaching for Jake's hand. Jake felt his smile spread across his whole face as he took her hand, not caring who saw. "Is that your scientific opinion, Doctor?" "It's my personal experience," Vera replied, standing on her toes to kiss him right there in front of both rescue teams. When they broke apart, the human officer was shaking his head but grinning. "Well, I've seen stranger things in my career. If you're both sure about this." "We're sure," Jake and Vera said at the same time, making several of the rescue team members chuckle. An hour later, Jake was aboard Vera's research ship. officially reassigned to the Xenobiology Division. As they lifted off from the desert planet that had nearly killed them both, Vera piloted them toward the stars while Jake sat in the co-pilot seat. "Any regrets?" Vera asked as the planet fell away beneath them. Jake looked at her. This brilliant, beautiful woman who had chosen to trust him with her most vulnerable moments, who had shown him that love really could transcend any boundary. "Only one," he said. Vera's face fell slightly. "What?" "That it took crashing on a desert planet to find you," Jake said with a grin. Vera laughed, the sound filling the ship's bridge like music. "Where should we go first?" she asked, bringing up a star chart full of unexplored worlds. Jake studied the map, then looked back at Vera. "Anywhere," he said, "as long as we go together." As their ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward whatever adventures awaited, Jake realized that sometimes the best discoveries weren't new worlds or alien artifacts. Sometimes they were finding the one person in all the galaxy who made you feel like you'd finally come home.